What's the worst crime to happen in your area? Neighbors that lived across the road from me were having domestic issues. The wife brings over a box of stuff for us to stash because she's afraid he will steal/burn it. We stash it for her, no problem. A week later, she is missing. The following week, they found her dead, stuffed in a box in his storage unit. He got life. We gave the box of stuff to her daughter.
That's quite a heavy situation. It's tough to see something like that unfold in your neighborhood. It makes you think about the unseen struggles people face. Helping her out with the box seems like the right thing to do, even if the outcome was tragic. Losing someone like that definitely leaves a mark on the community. It's just a reminder of how fragile life can be.
My high school was where one of the prom mom instances happened in the early 90s. She gave birth to the baby at her prom in the bathroom, cut the umbilical cord with the serrated edge of the paper towel dispenser, and put it in the garbage. One of my history teachers was actually the one who found the baby. She said it still haunts her to this day. It was the umbilical cord that was cut, not the baby's throat. I realize there's a major difference, and I apologize for the misinformation.
That story is pretty wild. I can't imagine being in that situation. The idea of a prom night turning into something like that is just insane. And finding the baby must have been shocking for the teacher. It's interesting how such moments can stick with people for years. High school has its share of unexpected stories, but this one definitely stands out.
Grew up in a small town north of the Bay Area. While watching a documentary about Jim Jones, my teacher started crying. Found out for several years Jones's church was in our town, 2 miles from my house. And after everyone committed suicide in Guyana, they ran a list of names on the local news. A large number of previous students and their parents were on the list. The shit didn't go down in my town, but a whole generation where I grew up lost friends and family to that guy, and the church, with a guard tower, still stands to this day, but with a different denomination.
That's a wild story. It's crazy how you can be so close to something like that and not even know. I can't imagine what it was like for those people in your town. It's haunting to think about the history there, especially with the church still standing. Makes you reflect on how events like that resonate through generations. Life has some heavy moments that stick with you long after they happen.
Growing up, I lived in a high-regarded, safe suburb. A few blocks from my house, a girl, 16, who also happened to be a coworker of mine, was approached at an intersection stop as she was driving home and was shot in the neck. She lived and is doing fine now. It was the scariest, most random thing to happen in the otherwise quiet suburb.
That's a wild story. It really puts things into perspective. You think you're in a safe area, and then something like that happens. It's alarming how quickly life can change. It's good she survived. I guess you never know what can happen, even in the most peaceful places. Makes you a bit more aware of your surroundings, you know?
Probably the kidnapping of Michael Dennehy. He is still just considered missing, but it's been 20+ years. You'd have to be pretty optimistic to believe he didn't meet a horrible fate. He was just a small boy when taken, and the incident absolutely rocked my small crime-free city. It changed everything. Parents kept a much more careful eye on us kids. Many of our freedoms were taken away. I still feel sick when I think about what horrible things must have happened to that poor boy.
It's a tough story. Michael Dennehy went missing when he was just 4 years old, and it really shook the community. People started being more cautious about their kids. You could feel the shift in the air, like innocence was lost. Even now, it leaves a heavy feeling thinking about what might have happened to him. It reminds you that sometimes, bad things do happen in places you least expect.
I live in Chicago in a very safe neighborhood. However, about 1/4 of a mile away, there is a major intersection and there is a gang-related shooting every year. They usually happen at like 2 in the morning, but one time it happened in broad daylight. The guy went up to the victim, shot him, and tossed his gun on the ground and fled the scene. Scary stuff, and he's never been caught.
That sounds intense. Living near a place like that must feel unsettling, even if your neighborhood is safe. It's wild how life can be so normal, and then something shocking happens out of nowhere. Not knowing who did it, and the fact they're still out there makes it worse. Hope you stay safe and keep your distance from that intersection. It's a reminder that things can turn dangerous quickly.
One of the victims of the Surrey 6 murders in Surrey, BC, was a high school classmate of mine. Good guy and good friends with a number of friends in my own social circle. The two of us had only talked a few times, but we could be classified as acquaintances. He and 5 others were killed execution style in a single gang-related targeted hit in 2007.
That's a tough story. It's weird how someone you kind of knew can be part of something so tragic. I remember hearing about it back then, and it really hit home. It just shows how violence can affect anyone, even if you're not super close. It's a reminder to appreciate the people around you, no matter how well you think you know them. Life can change in an instant.
7 years ago at my university, in the dorms, a mom of one of the students killed her daughter's roommate. It was one of the saddest things that ever happened on my campus. The mom had been staying in their apartment and thought she heard the roommate saying bad things about her daughter. I checked in on the daughter on Facebook randomly last year. We've been friends, and she's doing well.
That's a heavy story. It's wild how something so tragic can happen in a place that's supposed to be safe. I remember hearing about it back then. It shook everyone up. It's good to hear the daughter is doing okay now. Sometimes, you just don't know what's going on behind closed doors. Life can take some strange turns. Glad she's found her way after such a hard time.
This will probably be buried, but I live 10 minutes away from the theater shooting in Aurora. I went there a lot as a kid, and as I got older, I stopped. I remember the news in the morning before heading to school. I just stood with my mouth open. Later that day, I found out one of my friends was in the Dark Knight screening, but he went out for a smoke before the movie. He heard the shots and ran.
That sounds really intense. Being so close to something like that must have been surreal. It's wild how life can change in an instant. Your friend's decision to step out for a smoke probably saved his life. It's moments like those that stick with you, leaving a mark on your memories. Glad he made it out okay, but it's a reminder of how unpredictable things can be.
My next-door neighbor shot his wife in the head and stuffed her in the closet wrapped up in a carpet and told his 2 kids that she was lost at Walmart. She was there for 3 days until his son found her. It's been about 6 years, and I've always called it the murder house. Last month, I was talking to my best friend and his brother-in-law, who mentioned he used to live on my road, which is a long country road, about 6 years ago. I never made the connection. I asked him if he knew about the murder house. He was the son who found his mom in the closet.
That's a pretty wild story. It's strange how events can connect people without them realizing it. Imagining the trauma of finding out that your mom was in your own home like that is heavy. Your neighbor's actions are just beyond messed up. Makes you think about how close we can be to something dark without even knowing. Life has a way of surprising us, sometimes in the worst ways.
So, your neighbor was a major drug dealer, as in the level that supplies the street dealers, and he got beat up by rival dealers wanting his stash? I mean, I don't want to wish harm on people, but seriously, if the worst crime to ever happen in your neighborhood is a drug dealer got beat up and then arrested, I think you're doing pretty well.
Yeah, it's wild how some neighborhoods have way crazier stuff going on. I remember my own area had some sketchy characters too, but nothing too serious. Just a couple of loud fights and the occasional police sirens. Honestly, if that's the worst thing, I guess you could say it's pretty chill. Just makes you appreciate the calm times when you can sit back and relax without worrying about what's happening outside.
I live in an area, and from local reports the entire thing was pre-planned, and they had several different plans in place if one failed. The girl literally crawled out of the woods to a nearby road to save her life. I believe she is fully recovered and doing fine, but talk about losing trust in people.
That's a tough situation. It's wild to think about how some people can plot things like that. The fact that she managed to get to safety shows just how strong she is. It's hard to imagine losing trust in people like that, though. It changes the way you see everyone around you. It's good to hear she's okay now. Makes you appreciate the little things in life.
Oh, in a city near my town, there was this group of teenagers and youngsters around 20 to 30 years old who were into Satanism and shit. They called themselves the Beasts of Satan and were accounted responsible of disappearance of 5 and death of 3, instigation to suicide, drug possession and dealing, illicit weapon possession, and a series of other funny things. I actually knew one of them. Seemed like a cool guy, and we also played Warhammer 40K once. He got 20 years.
That's a wild story. It's strange how you can find yourself in unexpected circles. Knowing someone involved in that kind of chaos definitely makes you think twice about appearances. Playing Warhammer together, it's odd to imagine that side of him. Just goes to show that people can lead really complex lives. Makes you wonder what goes on behind closed doors.
Oh my god, was this around 2010 to 2011-ish? I worked for American Airlines. We had a Delta pilot come into the airport. Airport police were waiting for him. They arrested him immediately when he landed, escorted him out, and everyone asked what was going out. We were told he was having an affair with a married woman, and Hay decided to kill the husband and burn down the house. Crazy.
That's a wild story. Just imagine being at the airport and seeing all that happen. It's strange how some people can get caught up in such extreme situations. The drama of it all must have shocked everyone there. It's a reminder that life can take unexpected turns. Can't believe things like this go down with pilots. Makes you think about what people are hiding behind closed doors.
A block away from my house 5 years ago, or so, SWAT showed up to this house. A sniper was deployed to a roof, and a cop with a bullhorn was negotiating with someone, and half that block was evacuated. This kid took his parents hostage and threatened to blow up the house with a bomb. The city turned the gas lines to the block off. This one ends better cause no one was hurt and he surrendered. Turns out this guy's dad is my dentist. This happened in the second largest city in Manitoba, Canada, where situations like this are very, 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 very rare. I don't get how people can go after their parents.
That's a wild story. It's hard to wrap your head around a kid doing something like that. Taking parents hostage seems really extreme. It's good no one got hurt, but it's unsettling how something so serious can happen so close to home. Makes you think about what drives people to those actions. Kind of puts a different perspective on knowing your neighbors, right?
Exactly. I recently read a story about a newborn who was just left outside in some random yard. Thankfully, someone found her, and she's expected to make a full recovery. And I cried because all a little baby wants when they're born is to be held close and to feel loved and safe. I remember how in the hospital my son wouldn't sleep unless he was cuddled up against my chest. This poor little thing was left out there all alone, sad face.
It's definitely sad to hear about that baby. Just makes you think about how much warmth and care a newborn needs. I remember when my friend had their first child. They were so worried about holding the baby too much, but honestly, the baby just wanted that comfort. It's tough to imagine anyone not having that safe space, especially when they're just starting out in life. I
had the snipers pointed at me once. That was a tad alarming. Since you're probably wondering now, I was playing airsoft with some friends on private property, legally, and one of the idiots I was with decided it was a good idea to leave the property and run down the street in the middle of town with a realistic-looking Glock airsoft gun. Police were called. We were surrounded by tons of armed police officers. What a day. I was 14 or 15 at the time.
That sounds pretty intense. Being surrounded by armed police can't be a fun experience, especially at that age. It's wild how quickly things can escalate over a game. I guess that moment really highlights the importance of knowing the right place and time for things like airsoft. Glad to hear you made it out okay though. Just a crazy story to tell later on.
Coming from a teenager, I don't know if this is a universal problem, but I really didn't like my middle school. Some kids, 13 to 14-year-old kids, saying racist slurs, and unsurprisingly, I had a class with one kid who said them every lunch period. He was easily the worst kid in my math class. The teacher was great, and she had to deal with him. I feel bad for her.
Yeah, middle school can be pretty rough. It's tough when some kids act out like that. I remember dealing with a kid like that too. It's interesting how kids can just pick up on what they hear and repeat it, not really understanding the impact. The teachers often get stuck in the middle, trying to keep the peace. It's just a weird time for everyone involved.
My old lady neighbor was one of these people. She was having none of it, and then they switched it, and she lost it, and basically, we just had to listen to her rant for a while when we would see her gardening for a few months. She never put up any signs or anything, and she never actually told any of us why she didn't want a smart meter. Crazy old lady.
It's wild how some people stick to their ways. I had a neighbor like that too. She would go on about the old times, refusing to adapt to any new tech. Just imagine hearing her ramble while she tended to her garden. You never really know what's going on in someone's head, but it made for some interesting conversations when we crossed paths. Just a quirky part of the neighborhood.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.